Scott Michaels is the owner of Dearly Departed Tours in Hollywood and the host of the popular documentary 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter. He's an expert on Los Angeles history, the alluring, the sordid, and the alluringly sordid, including, of course, the events of that most tumultuous year of 1969. That's why Quentin Tarantino called upon Scott's expertise as he was prepping his new film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Among other duties that he fulfilled for the film, Scott took Tarantino and his team on his acclaimed Helter Skelter tour, visiting the sites that were frequented by Tate LaBianca, Manson and the Girls, and the assorted celebrities and questionable elements they associated with. In this first of a two-part interview, Scott discusses this Los Angeles of yesteryear and how he assisted Tarantino and his collaborators in recreating it. Scott will return as a guest on our August 69 series, premiering on August 5th, to discuss the 50th anniversary of the Helter Skelter saga.
You are obviously, anyone that's listening to you speaking now or who has taken your tour, knows anything about you, you are obviously an authority on this material, which brings us to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Tell me about the call, how you were contacted to be a part of this team.
One of the guys who works for me texted me one day and he says, "Oh, get this, Quentin Tarantino's people called and they want to talk to you." And that's pretty cool, huh? And I'm like, yeah, that's great. So I contacted the woman at the office, and she said that Quentin wants to meet with you. So I went to the office, and I figured I'm going to be in a room with 20 people, and so I was introduced around by someone. And to different people, and I'm the set designer, and I'm the one that's doing this, and I'm, it's like, oh, it was great, and people are going, I really liked your movie. I'm like, that's really cool. And then they brought me to Quentin's door, and they said, Quentin, this is Scott. And he stood up, and he shook my hand, and they shut the door, and it was me and him for about an hour, and just talking about the case. And my movie was on his desk, and he goes, this is what I want. This is, the feel of what you're doing is exactly what I want. And at that point, nobody knew the plot of the movie. Still, we all kind of know what it's about now. But back then, nobody really knew, and so I wasn't sure if the movie was going to be all about the case or not. But we just went through the different facets of it, and then as I'm leaving, it was in February, I think, because it was still cold out. And he said, what I'm really excited about is bringing 1969 back to Los Angeles. And I'm like, oh, my God, because I met the woman who, in the Doors movie, this was a couple of days later when I took them all around in my van, and I said, oh, did you see the Doors movie when they made Sunset Boulevard put it back to the way it looked at that time? And she says, yeah, I did that. That was my job on the movie. And I'm like, oh my God, I was and I talked about Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and she's like, I did that movie. I'm like, oh, this is the coolest thing.
Wow.
So, but Quentin says, I really want this to be about 1969. And for a few years, I've had, 1969 is my favorite year. So many wonderful things happened that year, and some not so. But I have this huge 1969 tattooed over my forearm. So I have my jacket on, and I go, I just got to show you this. And I took my jacket off, and I showed him my forearm. He goes, you're the guy, man. You are the guy. And I'm like, to hear him say that was pretty freaking cool. So I was.
And he has your movie on his desk. That's
awesome. I know, right? and I got calls from other people saying, the costume person called me and they said, we want to talk about what the Straight Saints were wearing, the biker gang, and we talked for a little while, and then I got a text back from her saying, oh, I really liked your movie. So I know that Tarantino does screenings, at he owns a theater, which actually will show up in the movie, and just a block down from the El Coyote, and I have a feeling he may have shown people that movie because so many people on the production told me they saw it and they liked it, which is pretty cool.
Wow. So you gave the production team the Helter Skelter tour to kind of initiate them to that time period and locations?
Yeah. Yeah, we you know, I picked them all up at the office, and you know, they brought along their giant first aid kit and their huge Wi-Fi and all this business. And there were about a half a dozen of them, and Tarantino was one of them. And you know, we just drove around. I took them up to, you know, where they hosed off in the driveway. I took them up to Cielo. We parked and we walked up Cielo Drive to the gates. And when he was talking, he's like, "Oh, and this was Rick's house," and you know, I didn't know what it meant, but Rick Dalton now we know is Leonardo DiCaprio, and in the movie he's neighbors with Sharon Tate. So when he was talking about the house up there, just shooting off of his hip at that point, you know, he said, "Oh, this would be where Rick lived," and et cetera. So it was kind of interesting now in retrospect to know what they were talking about. And I remember that time when there was a point when they were out walking around, and I went back to my bus because I didn't want to leave it for too long. And the paperwork, you know, I didn't take pictures. I probably should have. But Burt Reynolds was still listed on the paperwork as George Spahn, which was kind of interesting. Just kind of fun. And then the shoot up on Hollywood Boulevard, my God, that was mind-blowing when they went up there and they put an entire city block of Hollywood Boulevard back to both sides of the street. You know, the old Peaches Records was put up and the old movie theaters were there showing Romeo and Juliet and you know, it's just all the old restaurants were put back. And for a history nerd like me, it was like, you know, this is the only time in my life where I'll be able to actually physically travel back in time. All the old parking meters were put back. All the old billboards were put back. And it was a really, really special time in L.A. for people like me to watch this, to watch L.A. being put back. And I mean, my God, Jay Sebring's salon was put back in Jay Sebring's salon. And I just went on the set that day because I wanted to take pictures. And you know, one of the guys on the crew says, "Hey, come back and say hey to Quentin." I'm like, "Okay, I'll come back and say hey to Quentin." So you know, I was taken into the salon, and you know, Margot Robbie's standing there, and I'm like, "This is trippy." And then Tarantino's working, and I just kind of waved, and I said, "Do you mind if I take a couple of pictures of the outside?" And I'm like, "No." He goes, "No problem." And I'm leaving. And he pulls me aside. He goes, "I got to ask you something." And he asked me something that was really nerdy about the case. And I can't really say what it was because I promised I wouldn't. But he asked me something really about a nerdy detail about the case. And I love that kind of stuff. And he did too. So it was kind of neat. And then as I'm leaving, I'm walking down the street. You know, I'm maybe 100 yards away, and I hear my name called out. I hear Scott, and I turn around, and it's Tarantino. And I go back, and I go, "Okay, he knows my name. That's pretty cool." And he goes, "I want you to meet somebody." And he looks behind him. He goes, "Scott, meet Jay Sebring." And Emile Hirsch comes out, and it was like, oh my God! So you know, Tarantino gets it, and he knew that it would freak me out, and it was really neat. And I couldn't say anything but do well by these people, you know, just do a good job.
Yeah. And you could tell, even by the reviews, you could tell that he has a deep affection for these characters and this time in history, the same as you do. Yeah, we got along. He loves the pop culture references. And I'll tell you a couple of things that I told him, and I've got emails to prove all this stuff, so I'm not talking out of my ass. But a couple of things I told him, there are a couple of pieces of music that had to do with the case, and they showed up in the trailers. One of them was Good Times by Paul Revere and the Raiders. Now, I had met Mark Lindsay several years ago, and we spoke at length about living on Cielo Drive, and he said that, you know, Manson, first time I met Manson, this is like 2 years before the murders, first time I met Manson, he was sitting on the floor of my kitchen, because he lived in Cielo Drive before Candace Bergen moved in. He was roommates with Terry Melcher. And he goes, "Yeah, in fact, Terry and I wrote Good Times on the piano in the room." And I'm like, there's a nugget of information. You know, Good Times is a really big Paul Revere and the Raiders song. And I know that the house was rented furnished because Altobelli rented the house furnished. So with the same furniture Terry was sitting on, it was the same furniture that Sharon and Roman were sitting on. So the piano that was in the room when the murders happened, this iconic Paul Revere and the Raiders song was written. And I'm like, that's weird. 10 feet away from where Sharon Tate was murdered, this song was composed on the very furniture that was in the room. Not many people would really nerd out by something like that. But it showed up in one of the trailers, so I know it came from me. And it's in the movie. There's a big musical sequence with that song in the movie. And weren't Paul Revere and the Raiders, weren't they photographed in the Cielo house for some promotional? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Tiger Beat or 16 feature on Mark Lindsay, and I found that like 20 years ago in a junk shop, and I'm like, that's the gates to Cielo. You know, they didn't even show the rest of the house, but it's like I knew that gate. I knew it straight away, and it didn't say anything about Cielo Drive or anything like that in the interview. But I've since then seen pictures of the entire band, you know, standing on the staircase of the garage that was on the closest to the gate side of the property. Yeah.
Wow. You know, and when we were in your store, Adam and I, you showed us a picture of you and Tarantino kind of wrapping arms, and I think it was at the Jay Sebring house. Yeah,
it was. And the people that own the Sebring house are friends of mine, and that day when we were out driving around, I on a whim called my friend. And I said, I got some friends that want to see your house. And the people that own the house are really nice to me. And they've done that a couple of times for me. One time I was up there with one of the Playboy, Bridget, from the girls next door, who's a friend of mine. And she goes, I'd love to see that house. So I called them, and they said, come on up. So I came up, and I said, I have a couple of people. Do you mind if we come and look at it? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we went up and checked out the house. And my friend let him, he was surprised that it was Tarantino, but, he's not
starstruck.
Didn't faze him that much, He wasn't being blasé about it. It's just like it's not on his radar. He knew who he was. So those guys, Tarantino and the set people, they were all over the property, checking it out. And I remember him saying that this is where the jacuzzi could be, and et cetera. And then I found out that they I gave them the contact information, that they were in touch with my friends, and they shot up there for like 3 days. That shows up in the trailer too. One of the locations. And I know they put the pool back. The pool was in disrepair because of just from age. And Tarantino, those guys took up and they dressed the house up to look exactly like it did in '69. Put the old barbecue back, because there's footage of that. There's this old home movie footage of Sharon and Jay sitting, on the property, and the house is clearly in the background and the certain staircases. So they had a point of reference, and they used it, and it was really kind of cool to see them working on that.
Wow, that authenticity is just incredible. And there's a popular blogger who saw the movie at Cannes, and he blogged a review about it. And he mentioned in his review, kudos to Tarantino for finding a road that looks like Cielo Drive to film in. And I was like, no, he actually filmed on Cielo Drive.
I know that they spent a couple of days on Cielo. They didn't go so far. They didn't go all the way up the street, because there's a certain point where authenticity is gone with the extra houses that are on the street. But there is a point where you drive up Cielo and you make that hard left turn where Cielo continues. And they shot up there for days, and there was the Jay's black Porsche going up, Jay's black horse coming down, different costume change going up and going down, Manson going up and down, the girls going up and down on foot. So different aspects of it, day, night, etc. So, and they put the old street lights back and the old street signs back, and yeah, that was a really interesting time. That was there's a piece of there's one of the clips in the trailer that show that intersection that I show on the tour now, because it's just like, there it is. And I know that street so well, so there's a half a second in the trailer, not even, like probably 1/20th of a second of the girls walking down the street, and I know that exact spot, and I know which direction they were walking in, and et cetera. So it was kind of cool. So yeah, he went back as best he could to make it look exactly like it did. And I know they used 3 houses for the actual Tate house for different angles. As far as the front gate goes, I understand that that's in Universal City somewhere. But I do know that they used 3 different houses to represent 3 different portions of the house.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I don't know why, because I never saw it in person, but I have such a kind of romantic feeling towards that old house. I thought it was such a beautiful home, and now it's a McMansion. They tore it down. But were you able to see that house before it was demolished? I know you were there when it was being demolished.
Yeah, I saw the house. I saw it once. That's the best I could do. I did visit L.A. back in the 80s, and I took a picture of it from across the canyon. So my pictures, I laid eyes on it, and that's it, the end. So I'm glad to have had that opportunity at that point. But just to say that I did see it, but that would have been really something to have actually been run around the property and actually see it. A couple of years ago, there was a show that I helped on called Aquarius, starring David Duchovny, and that was another one that was based loosely on the time, with Manson and the detectives, and before the murders, and it was a lousy show. It sucked, really. It was not a good show. But it was shot across the street from where I live at Paramount Studios. So a buddy of mine called me up and said, you got to see this. So I went on the lot, and we walked into a sound stage, and I was on the front lawn of the house, and I got to walk through the front door, and I was in the living room, and it was crazy. The beams and the entryway and the doors being in the right place, and that was a wild experience. So I would have loved to have been on the set for that when Tarantino was shooting it, because I know they had gone to much more detail about it. And these things are so important to L.A., and it's so cool that this movie is so important to L.A. It's just there's movies about the '60s, but there's nothing like this. And it's based on reality and on fiction, and just showing it the way it really, really was. And there's so many crap movies out there and television programs, so it's neat to have this touched on by someone who really has a feel for what it's going to be, what it was, because he was there.
I want to know, since you have such an affection for that period of time, what's the one thing you're most nostalgic for from that period in LA history?
Well, that's a really good question. I guess it's, I don't know. It's probably the block where the Whiskey A Go-Go is. There was so many things going on, the Galaxy and the London Fog, and that whole area was such an important. Roxy was right over there, and now is the Rainbow. So there's a little stretch of about 2 blocks on Hollywood Boulevard, which warms my heart. I love going there because you can kind of imagine what it was like to be there. It hasn't changed all that much. Unfortunately, across from it is where the Viper Room is, and that whole block hasn't changed at all either. But that whole block is coming down within the next couple of years for a new development. So, it's heartbreaking to see places where you can actually hold up a picture and say, see how it all matches up. And there's not much left like that in Los Angeles, and that's why it was so magical that Tarantino put it back. And because it's going to be gone forever, and that is so heartbreaking for what I do, and so many of us. We don't have the money to save things, but all we do is sit back and watch it happen, and it's just so sad. So Dino's Lodge, Dean Martin's old restaurant, was such a cute little 1-story or 2-story place on the corner of La Cienega and Sunset, and now in its place is this black box of a place that's about 10 stories tall that blocks an entire neighborhood of view, and it just changed the landscape, literally. And I don't know, it's heartbreaking. It is. That's why it's so cool to see these little nuggets here and there, and I do focus on that as much as I can, but at the same time I'm always throwing up my hands and just saying, how can this happen? But
and it doesn't seem to protect these sites when they deem them sites of historical value. This is a historic site not to be touched. Those are being torn down.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most ridiculous and heartbreaking was the Ambassador Hotel. One of the most important events in American history. Bobby Kennedy was shot in the hotel and killed. But also the Academy Awards, the Coconut Grove, and it was an amazing, wonderful, huge hotel. And they did gave it historic status, but it was owned by the Los Angeles Unified School District. And when they destroyed the hotel, they promised to leave the Coconut Grove there and incorporate it into the new school. But then one day they go, oh no, and they destroyed that too. and they built a school that looks exactly like the Ambassador Hotel in shape and size in the place. So I find that just it's almost a slap in the face to historians, you know. But yeah, that's L.A. L.A. has always been out with the old and with the new. That's Hollywood. That's the style. I just didn't think it would happen so much
50 years from
in
now,
such a short period of time.
Talking about all this new development, 50 years from now, who's going to be nostalgic for those huge, gaudy industrial buildings that they're erecting on these sites,
And who's going to stay in these hotels? And, what are they going to see? What happens in L.A.? They're taking everything down. What are they coming to stay in to see? Who's got that kind of money to buy condos, that start at like $400,000 for one bedroom? Just outrageous. So, it's a different world. It is literally a different world anymore. And that's why I guess Tarantino has made it so special, because I know that his heart was in it.
Well, I just noticed that. I know there are a lot of ordinances that they passed in Los Angeles, and it really bothers me when people buy up these properties and they'll, in the middle of the night, demolish something, even though there's an ordinance, when nobody can stop them. And I think that's disgusting. I've been seeing some of that going on, too, from what I've been reading, and that breaks my heart, really.
It is heartbreaking. We had a great Googie style restaurant that was 50s dinery kind of a place. It was not very far from Hollywood that the owner bought, and it was given historic status. And you're right, in the middle of the night with the bulldozers. And thankfully, somebody stopped them and called the police. And I can't imagine that conversation, because the police are getting a call about destroyed building, but they responded and they stopped it, and they fined the guy. And somebody eventually, Bob's Big Boys, bought it, and they restored it back to the way it looked. And I heard recently, and I don't know where this exactly happened, but was it San Francisco possibly, where somebody illegally destroyed a home with architectural significance, and the judge made him build it back exactly. It was like, wow. Well, good for you. Teach him a lesson. But that's
fantastic.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, we were heartbroken with our last trip that there was no longer the James Dean gas station there. That had stayed up for so long, and then they tore it down.
Yeah,
that's
of
terrible.
all the places, a silly gas station on a corner, but that's prime real estate. And I don't know what they're still now a big pit. I mean, they've been working on it constantly for the last 6 months, but they're just building the foundation, so it's still a big dirt pit right now. But yeah, it's it's like, oh my God, how can you take that away? So now the James Dean tour that we do every year on the anniversary is like, well, this used to be here and this used to be there, and it's disheartening. Sometimes it really is, which is really cool when people come to LA and I get to hang out with them for a few hours on my tours, because I get to experience it sort of with more affection than in my normal life, where I look at everything in disgust. And not everything, but I'm bitter, I'm jaded, and get me back to 1968, 69.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
And Scott, my friend, I got to tell you, we all love you on this show, and we love the hell out of what you do and how you do it, and we cannot thank you enough for giving us time.
That's really. I thank you. It's nice to feel appreciated. It really is. When I'm doing this day-to-day business and worried about things breaking down and paying taxes, et cetera, whatever, it's just really nice to chill for a little while and talk to people who are genuinely interested in the things that I've stored in my head, and it's a real and to know that it's appreciated, and it's not going to be forgot. That's the thing. This stuff can't be forgot because it's our history. So thank you.